Deathloop is the new PS5 game from Arcane, the team who are best known for the Dishonored series, and it's by far their most ambitious game yet. Despite Microsoft now owning Bethesda, this, along with Ghostwire Tokyo, already had PS5 exclusivity before that deal went through. Sony have been marketing this game extremely heavily since the PS5 reveal event, with Deathloop trailers popping up at nearly every showcase they've had since. So it was clear Sony had a lot of confidence in Deathloop, and it's easy to see why. Deathloop's unique concept, excellent lead characters, and satisfying combat make it one of the PS5's best exclusives yet, even if it's let down a little by its poor AI and abrupt ending. Deathloop begins with our protagonist Colt being stabbed to death by a woman named Juliana Blake. Colt then wakes up on a beach at the start of a new day, with no recollection of where he is, why he's there, or even who he is. You can expect to see this beach a lot, as Colt quickly realises that he's trapped within a time loop, and that anytime he dies or the day ends, he wakes up again on this beach, with nothing but his trusty pistol. Colt soon discovers that he's on an island called Black Reef that's being run by a group of people known as the Visionaries, and that the only way to break the time loop he's trapped in is to kill all 8 of these Visionaries in the same day. Oddly, the inhabitants of Black Reef are completely fine with the fact that they're trapped in a time loop. In fact, they love it. They see it as an opportunity to have a never-ending party with absolutely zero consequences, because no matter what happens, everything will be reset at the strike of midnight anyway. Of course, killing these Visionaries won't be as simple as it sounds for a few reasons. The first being Juliana Blake. Juliana wants to maintain the time loop, so she's constantly hunting you, and will pop up out of the blue to try and kill you from time to time. Secondly, the Visionaries themselves will not go down without a fight. And thirdly, and most importantly, Colt is working against the clock to take down all 8 Visionaries in just one day, so you'll need to figure out how you can best maximise your limited time. One of Deathloop's strongest aspects is its characters, namely Colt and Juliana. From the second you start up the game, you can tell that there's a lot of history between the two of them, even if Colt can't remember said history, and their clashes never cease to be entertaining, thanks to the sharply written dialogue and wonderful performances. It was also a great idea to give Colt a walkie-talkie, so that him and Juliana's back and forth bickering can persist endlessly throughout the game. Colt and Juliana aren't the only interesting characters though. Far from it, in fact. I was impressed with just how interesting all of the different Visionaries are as well. They're such a weird and interesting mishmash of characters, and I was always eager to see which new Visionary I would be meeting next. Unfortunately, the story isn't quite on par with the excellent characters and voice acting. At first I was intrigued by the story. It presents a lot of interesting questions up front, like what's causing this time loop, why was everyone so quick to accept it, and who the hell even is Colt? And while I liked the mystery surrounding both the time loop and Colt's background, as well as the morbid sense of humour that persists throughout the game, the overarching story was a lot more surface level than I initially expected, and I found the ending to be quite abrupt and unsatisfying, with a lot of the answers to the game's mysteries being somewhat unfulfilling. When the credits rolled, I definitely did have a moment where I thought, that's it? While I was slightly underwhelmed with the story of Deathloop, the gameplay exceeded my expectations in every conceivable way. The moment-to-moment gameplay of Deathloop is nothing short of exceptional. Deathloop often makes you feel smart in a way that very few other games can. Exploration feels rewarding, and you're constantly having aha moments where you realise what you have to do next in order to get the day's events to fall in your favour. Despite what you might expect out of a game based around a time loop, there are no time constraints in Deathloop. While the day is divided into 4 periods of time, morning, noon, afternoon and evening, time won't advance until you leave an area. Because of this, you're always free to explore to your heart's content. A common misconception about Deathloop is that it's some kind of roguelike, but once you start playing it, you realise very quickly that it's definitely not. In fact, it's a lot more linear than you might expect. because at any point you can pull up a menu of all your leads on the Visionaries, and this menu will always point you towards what you should be doing, so even though Deathloop is quite open-ended, you'll never be at a loss as to where you should be heading next. Deathloop is a game that's largely about acquiring knowledge, figuring out what different areas are accessible at different times of the day, learning what times there are more or less guards in an area, and when and where the different Visionaries pop up, so you can start forming plans to manipulate events to get multiple Visionaries in the same place at once, allowing you to get a perfect loop by killing all the Visionaries in one run. Colt retains his memories between runs, which means once you've figured out the solution to a problem, you won't need to solve it again, so you'll cut out a lot of steps on repeat loops. He'll even be able to automatically fill in any door codes you've discovered before, so you won't have to input the same codes over and over again across the countless loops it takes to finish Deathloop. Like Arcane's prior games, Deathloop does a fantastic job of letting you play however you want, which lends the gameplay a lot of variety. You can play Deathloop as a stealth game, a straight up first person shooter, or anything in between. Usually in this kind of game, I'd mostly stick to the stealth route, but I found myself taking a more head-on approach here, often going into situations guns blazing. This is because Deathloop's combat is so satisfying that I felt like I was almost depriving myself of it when I was taking a more sneaky approach. While picking off enemies with a silenced pistol is certainly fun, I was definitely having even more fun when charging at enemies at full speed and sliding in close to blow them away with a shotgun. The gunplay feels fantastic, and Deathloop has a pretty varied selection of weapons to utilise. I was very partial to the silent but deadly Spiker, a nail gun that's power can be charged up by holding down the trigger, as well as a pair of dual pistols that could snap together to form an SMG. Each weapon even has a different rarity level. Better guns have more powerful perks tied to them, whereas your run-of-the-mill common guns are not only less powerful, but also have the potential to jam in the middle of a firefight. Before you even engage in combat, you'll likely want to scout out the area and tag all of the enemies within it. Tagging enemies not only helps you keep track of where they are, but it'll even let you know what kind of weapons they're armed with, and if you focus on them, you'll be given some information about their combat tendencies and hints about what kind of loot they might drop. It's once you start combining your weapons with powers when things start to get extremely interesting in Deathloop. Colt acquires a series of supernatural powers by collecting artifacts known as slabs off of Visionaries or Juliana once he's killed them. This of course means that the Visionaries and Juliana can also use slabs, which makes them much more dangerous than your average run-of-the-mill goon. You can have 2 slabs selected at a time, and each of them are useful for different situations. All up, there's 6 different slabs. The reprise slab, which is the first slab you get, allows Colt to be revived twice without resetting the time loop. You'll also briefly be invisible after returning to life, allowing you to slip away from whatever it was that killed you. The reprise slab is the only slab that Colt will always have, as it doesn't take up either of your 2 slab slots. Your extra lives are also restored whenever you transition between areas, so you're not just stuck with 3 lives for an entire run. The Ether slab allows you to turn invisible if you're a stealth-focused player. The Shift slab allows you to teleport short distances to get the jump on enemies or explore areas that wouldn't normally be accessible on foot. The Carnesis slab lets you telekinetically fling enemies around like ragdolls. The Havoc slab simultaneously boosts your health and damage, allowing you to tank your way through fights. And finally, my favourite slab, the Nexus slab, links multiple enemies together so that whatever happens to one of them happens to all of them, allowing you to pick off several enemies at once with a well-timed headshot. Visionaries are also not above the rules of other NPCs, so one of my favourite ways to take them out was to link them to another NPC with Nexus, then kill them by taking out that NPC, saving me the trouble of taking the Visionary on face to face. I mostly stuck to the Nexus and Ether slabs. They made a pretty powerful combo that perfectly suited my playstyle. I could use Nexus to kill groups of enemies at once, but then switch to Ether to turn invisible and skulk away whenever I was in over my head, or if I simply wanted to get into a better position to hit the next group with Nexus. Deathloop really rewards you for getting creative in combat. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of Deathloop. Slabs can even be upgraded to make them more powerful. To upgrade a slab, you simply need to find the visionary you took it off of again in another loop so that you can kill them and take their slab again. Each slab can be upgraded 4 times, with each additional copy of the slab adding another buff to make it more powerful. For example, the first shift upgrade allows you to use the ability while in mid-air, while one of the upgrades for Nexus allows you to leech health off of enemies who have been linked. Your slabs aren't the only thing that can be upgraded though. You'll also find trinkets, which when equipped will give buffs to both Colt himself and his weapons. A lot of these trinkets become so important to your playstyle that it's hard to imagine going back to playing without them. For example, a trinket I got very early on was the Spring Healed trinket, which allows Colt to double jump. It's impossible to imagine not using it, because whenever I unequipped it, I felt like I was losing a lot of mobility and really hamstringing myself. A lot of these trinkets also have an interesting push and pull to them. One trinket I found allowed Colt to take less damage, but it also caused him to deal less damage. Colt also has a couple of other gadgets that'll come in handy throughout his journey. The Hack-a-Majig is a device that allows you to hack electronics in the environment, allowing you to unlock doors, disable security devices, or create distractions for enemies. He also has the incredibly handy Strelac Sapper Charge, a device that can shift on the fly from grenade to proximity charge to tripwire mine. While at first you lose everything upon dying, you quickly discover a resource called Residuum. You can infuse weapons, slabs, and trinkets with Residuum so that you can keep them between loops. Like anything else, Residuum itself doesn't carry over between loops though, so you'll want to make sure you spend it all before starting a fresh loop. By the time I'd finished Deathloop, Colt was armed to the teeth with a crazy arsenal of weapons, powers, and trinkets, and was a far cry from the Colt at the beginning of the game who had nothing but a knife and a crappy common pistol. Deathloop's concept and mechanics can seem like a lot to take in, but I assure you the game is nowhere near as overwhelming as it initially sounds. New mechanics are introduced over time at an appropriate pace that allows you to absorb everything the game is throwing at you. Deathloop was clearly built with a focus on making its environments interesting to explore. The levels are intricately designed, buildings intertwine in interesting ways, and areas are packed with different routes to explore. Deathloop also rewards you for being thorough in your exploration, by not only giving you essential information like door codes, but by packing environments with different notes and audio diaries that further build out the world. I wanted to read every note I found in Deathloop. This is partially because the game's central mystery is so engaging that I was constantly on the lookout for new clues about it, but also because the notes are so well written that they had me clamouring for every shred of information about Deathloop's weird and wonderful cast of characters. But if you're not like me and you don't want to read everything, the game will highlight important information for you. It's also worth pointing out that things like door codes are actually randomised, so each playthrough is slightly different, meaning that you can't just blast through Deathloop with a guide. What elevates Deathloop above other Arcane games is the X factor Juliana Blake adds. The fact that she'll randomly invade your game at points means you'll nearly always need to be on your toes, and a well-planned strategy can immediately fall apart in the chaos of one of Juliana's invasions. Whether you're online or offline, Juliana will remain a persistent threat. If you're online, another player will control her, whereas if you play solo, she'll be controlled by the AI, which is a lot more predictable and easier to take down than most real players. When Juliana invades your world, the exits to the tunnels that Colt uses to skulk around Black Reef get locked, and you're forced to hack an antenna to reopen them. To get to the antenna, you'll either have to take the fight to Juliana and kill her, or lay low and avoid her entirely. I always tackled Juliana head on, because taking her down rewards you with valuable trinkets, weapons, and slabs. Fortunately, there are rules to Juliana's invasions, so you're not just under attack constantly. Juliana can only invade a certain amount of times during a loop, and she's only able to invade an area when a visionary is present, which means she won't swoop in and screw things up for you once you've killed a visionary and you're just trying to make your exit. Once you reach a certain point in the story, you'll unlock the ability to play as Juliana and jump into other players' games to hunt them down. Juliana has her own unique skills to master, like the ability to take the form of an NPC to blend in and get the jump on Cole. Juliana even has a hunter rank that increases through completing challenges and killing Colt. Though I've got to be honest, this never really got its hooks into me. Once I'd finished the main story, I was ready to move on to the next thing. Though it takes a lot for a PvP game to really catch my interest, so I never really expected this mode to grab me anyway. Deathloop's gameplay has one glaring issue, and that's its AI. Enemies are often exceptionally stupid. On multiple occasions, I accidentally set off trip mines a couple of feet away from enemies, and they didn't even notice. I get that in this kind of game, the AI are essentially just there to facilitate your power fantasies, and if they're too powerful, the game just wouldn't be fun, but there's definitely a better middle ground than this. It's certainly not a big enough deal to ruin the game for me, but it's the kind of thing that takes Deathloop from Game of the Year contender to just a great game for me personally. Deathloop is an extremely stylish game. Its world has so much personality, and I absolutely loved the 1960s inspired aesthetic. Deathloop's score also adds a lot to its incredible atmosphere. The energetic chase music that kicks in whenever Juliana is nearby is sure to always get the blood pumping, and if this and Snake Eater have taught us anything, it's that more games should have an epic opening theme song like they're a Bond movie. Deathloop is a truly clever game that encourages you to use your imagination and tackle problems in creative ways. While Deathloop's AI could use some work and its abrupt ending is a little unfulfilling, its excellent combat, fascinating cast and rewarding exploration make it a must-play if you're a PS5 owner. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe or leave a comment. You can also find countless other videos on my channel, including my recent reviews of Life is Strange True Colors and Aliens Fireteam Elite. And be sure to stay tuned for my upcoming reviews of Far Cry 6, Kena Bridge of Spirits, and Guardians of the Galaxy.